A woman drove 2 hours alone on a Saturday morning to watch a wedding she was not invited to. She wore a navy dress. She sat 4 rows from the front. She watched the father she shared with the bride walk that bride down the aisle, cry real tears at the end of it, and place her hand in her husband's hand. And then she drove 2 hours back, home without telling a single person she had been there. The bride did not know she existed. Welcome back to BetrayalLedger, where family secrets never stay buried for long. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe and join the family, because this story is one of the wildest ones we've ever told. Let's get into it. I am the bride. My name is Rachel Connolly. I am 33 years old. And what I am about to tell you is the story of the sister I did not know I had, the father I thought I knew completely, and the photograph that rearranged everything. I understood about the man who walked me down that aisle. My father, Dennis Connolly, was not the kind of man you doubted. That is the thing I need you to understand first, because everything that comes after is harder to hold if you do not understand that. He was 58 at the time of my wedding, broad-shouldered, steady, with the kind of face that always looked like it was thinking about something slightly more important than whatever was currently happening, but not in an arrogant way, in the way of a man who had decided early in life where he stood and had spent very little time since then questioning it. He had been a civil engineer for 30 years. Same company, same office in downtown Minneapolis. Same parking spot he had claimed in 1991 and occupied, without a single interruption ever since. He drove a truck. He grilled steaks on Saturdays. He had strong opinions about woodworking and weather and almost no opinions about anything that required real emotional complexity. He married my mother Susan when they were both 24. She was a dental hygienist from Duluth, who had met him at a mutual friend's cookout and decided within 40 minutes that he was worth the effort of knowing, a conclusion she held for 4 years with the steady, unsentimental conviction of a woman who made decisions carefully and then kept them. They had 2 children. My brother Colin, 4 years older than me, who lived in Seattle, and called on birthdays and holidays with the punctual reliability of someone meeting an obligation they respected but did not feel deeply, and me. Now here is what I need you to understand about my father and me specifically, because this is the part that made everything I eventually learned so impossible to carry. Dennis Connolly was not demonstrative. He did not say I love you casually. He did not hug you in the middle of the day for no reason. But he showed up, consistently, in the practical, physical, undeniable ways that some people mistake for the absence of feeling, and that I had always known was its presence. He came to every single swim meet I competed in from age 9 through 18, sitting in the bleachers in his work clothes because he drove straight from the office. He never missed one, not one. He sat with my college applications for 3 evenings at the kitchen table with a red pen and a legal pad, not rewriting what I had written but asking questions that made me write it better myself. When I was 26 and lost and unsure of everything, he drove 4 hours from Minneapolis to my apartment in Madison, Wisconsin on a Saturday morning with no warning, took me to breakfast at a diner on State Street, listened to everything I said without interrupting once, and drove home that afternoon. He did not offer advice. He just came. That was my father. That is who walked me down the aisle and cried real tears at the end of it. I met Marcus at a work conference in Chicago when I was 27. He was a structural engineer from St. Paul, which my father treated as immediately, almost suspiciously relevant, as though the universe had arranged Marcus specifically to meet his approval. They talked about load-bearing calculations and building codes at our first family dinner with the ease of 2 people who have stumbled into the same language. And my father looked at Marcus, across the table with the particular piece of a man who has made a decision and is satisfied with it. We were engaged 8 months later, married the following September in a church in Minneapolis that my mother had attended since she was 7 years old, a building that smelled of candle wax and old wood and the accumulated weight of every important thing that had happened inside it. I wore white. The light came through the stained glass in long amber and gold strips across the stone floor. My father took my arm at the back of the church, and we walked the full length of it together. And at the end of the aisle, when he placed my hand in Marcus's hand, he squeezed it once, hard, before he let go. I thought about that squeeze for years afterward. What it meant, what it held, what I did not know, what I could not have known, standing in that September light with everything I understood about my life arranged around me, was that 4 rows back from the front of the church, in the 3rd pew on the right side, a young woman in a navy dress was watching all of it. She was 22 years old. She had driven from Eau Claire, Wisconsin that morning, alone. 2 hours on a Saturday. To sit in a church she had not been invited to, and watch a man she knew as her father walk a daughter down the aisle. Not her, another daughter. She sat through the entire ceremony. She watched him cry. She watched him squeeze my hand. And then she drove 2 hours back to Eau Claire alone. And she never told anyone she had gone. Her name was Amber Connolly. She found me on a Tuesday evening 3 years after the wedding. She sent a message through a mutual acquaintance, a woman who worked in the same industry as both of us and had apparently connected us without fully understanding what she was connecting. The message was short. It said her name was Amber, that she believed we shared a father, and that she had something she wanted me to see. She attached a photograph. I want you to sit with what it feels like to open a photograph and see your father's face looking back at you, his arm around a girl you have never seen, his smile wide and real and completely unguarded, at what is clearly her high school graduation. Summer light, a folding table with food in the background, the specific casual warmth of a family gathering that was never meant to be a secret. From itself. Only from you. My father's arm was around her shoulders. His smile was real. I sat with that photograph for 4 hours before I called my mother. My mother answered on the second ring, the way she always answered. Voice already in the middle of something. Kitchen sounds, television in the background. I told her a woman named Amber had contacted me. I told her about the photograph. The silence on her end of the line had a texture I recognized immediately. Not the silence of surprise. The silence of someone who has been carrying something for a very long time and has just been told they can finally set it down. Susan Connolly told me everything she knew in the careful, deliberate way she told difficult things. Without dramatizing, without self-pity, with the steadiness of a woman who had decided that the truth was better than the alternative, no matter what it cost her to say it. She had found out about Amber's mother when Amber was 4 years old. A phone bill, a number she did not recognize, called repeatedly over 8 months. She had called the number from a payphone, and that detail alone places this story precisely in the mid-90s, a time when you had to work harder to find the truth and work harder still to live with it. A woman had answered. Her name was Valerie. She was 30, lived in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and she had a 4-year-old daughter named Amber, whose father was Dennis Connolly of Minneapolis. My mother and father had been married for 9 years at that point. I was 6 years old. Colin was 10. What happened after that phone call belongs to my parents' marriage and to choices my mother made that are hers to describe and not mine. What I will tell you is the shape of it, because the shape is what matters. My father had ended the relationship with Valerie before my mother found out, but Amber had been 4 years old, which meant he had a 4-year-old daughter in Eau Claire whom he had quietly, carefully, kept some kind of contact with in the years that followed, without ever bringing that part of his life into the 45 miles of interstate that separated his two worlds. My mother had stayed. That was her choice, made slowly and without drama over several months of conversations I was never part of. And it had produced the equilibrium I had always experienced as simply the way my parents were. Stable, functional, built on something that had decided to hold and had held. She had not told me. She had not told Colin. She had made the calculation that a 6-year-old and a 10-year-old did not need to carry what she was carrying, and she had made it again at 12, at 16, at 18, at 22, at 27, adding it each time to the weight. She had been quietly redistributing since the late 90s with the competence of a woman who had become very good at something she never wanted to be good at. I called my father the morning after I spoke to my mother. He picked up on the third ring. I said Amber's name. He was quiet for a long time. Not the quiet of evasion, the quiet of a man gathering himself because he understood that what he said next was going to matter in a way that most of what he said never did. Then he said, I should have told you myself. I said yes. He said he had not known how. I told him I understood that. And I told him it did not make it acceptable. Both things true at the same time, which is how most complicated things actually work. We talked for 1 hour and 20 minutes. The longest phone call I had ever had with my father. Longer than any conversation we had managed face to face. He told me about Valerie. He told me about Amber. He told me that Amber had known about me her whole life. That she had seen photographs. That she had asked about me and Colin and my mother for as long as she had been old enough to ask questions. And then he told me why she had driven to my wedding. She had wanted, in her own words, to see her sister get married. She had not expected to be acknowledged. She had not asked for anything. She had simply needed to be there, So she drove 2 hours on a Saturday morning, sat 4 rows back, watched the whole ceremony, watched him cry, watched him squeeze my hand at the end of the aisle, and then she drove 2 hours home, alone, and never told anyone. I called Amber that same evening. She answered on the first ring. That detail told me everything. She had been waiting. Her voice had the careful, slightly unreal quality of someone who has rehearsed the beginning of a conversation so many times that actually beginning it feels like stepping off a curb you have been staring at for too long. I told her I had no script for what I was about to say, that I was going to tell her what I actually thought, rather than what I had prepared myself to say. She said she would do the same. We talked for 2.5 hours. She was 25 by then, working as a graphic designer in Eau Claire, living in an apartment above a bakery she described with the specific, unself-conscious affection of someone who has built a life they are genuinely satisfied with despite the parts of it that were not easy. She was funny, dry, understated, the kind of funny that takes a moment to land and then stays with you. She remembered details I mentioned early in the conversation and returned to them naturally later, the way people do when they are actually listening, and not just waiting for their turn. She told me she had our father's eyes. She had confirmed it from photographs. She had his way of going quiet before saying something that mattered. And then she told me about the wedding. She told me she had driven there because she needed to see something real. Not a photograph, a real moment. She had needed to understand whether the man, who had been intermittently present in her life since she was 4 years old, was capable of the real kind of love, the full, unguarded, hand squeeze at the end of the aisle kind. She said she watched him cry and she understood that he was capable of it. And that understanding had been both a comfort and the hardest thing she had ever felt, because the capacity had been there the whole time, and she had never been inside the frame. I did not know what to say to that. I sat with it the way you sit with something that is true and painful and does not ask you to fix it. I flew to Eau Claire on a Saturday in April. We met at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the bakery below her apartment. Small, mismatched chairs, good coffee smell, something baking in the back. She was already there when I walked in. 2 cups on the table. She stood up when she saw me, and we looked at each other for a moment in the specific, strange way of people who share something fundamental and are meeting for the very first time. She had our father's eyes. That part was true. We had lunch and then walked along the river, because it was April, in Wisconsin, and the light was doing the thing April light does. That particular hopeful quality of light that has been rationed all winter and is suddenly everywhere at once, almost reckless with itself. We talked about our father and our mothers and what it means to be a family in the actual practical sense, rather than the theoretical one. By the time I drove back to St. Paul that evening, I had a sister I had not had that morning. That was not a simple thing. It was not a comfortable thing. It was absolutely, without question, the right thing. My father met Amber and me for dinner in Minneapolis 6 weeks later. He drove to the restaurant and sat down across from both of us and spent the first 10 minutes not quite knowing where to look. The way a man looks when he has been avoiding something for 30 years and is finally in the same room with it and discovering that it is not what avoidance had built it into in his imagination. It was just 2 women eating dinner with their father. It was just that. He was not absolved. I want to be clear about that. Amber was not required to forgive him. I was not required to pretend that 30 years of silence had not cost anyone anything. But we ate. We talked about her work and my work and his work and the winter that had just ended and the particular stubbornness of Wisconsin springs that promise warmth twice before they finally commit to it. He paid the bill. He walked us both to our cars and stood in that parking lot in the cool April evening and looked at Amber, the way he had looked at me at the end of that aisle, with the full, unguarded expression of a man who understands the weight of what he is holding. He said he was sorry. Once. The way he had said it to me on the phone, meaning it in the way the word rarely gets meant. Amber looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "I'll see you next time." Not forgiveness exactly, but a door left open. A next time offered by someone who did not have to offer it and who understood precisely what she was giving. I sat in my car in that parking lot before I started it. The evening was cold and clear, and the parking lot lights were coming on one by one in the early dark. I thought about a church in Minneapolis in September, amber and gold light through stained glass, a hand squeeze at the end of an aisle, that I had spent 3 years trying to understand. I thought about a woman in a navy dress, sitting 4 rows back, who had driven 2 hours to watch something she had every right to be inside of. She was inside it now. We both were. And that, after all of it, was enough to start with.